But I want to remind people that many of the most significant steps in evolution were not from slow, continuous improvement. They were actually from spasms of nature, cataclysmic events that caused quantum leaps. And I like to think that we are at that moment now where there's a convergence of global warming, of end-of-peak oil, of huge, unthinkable inequities in terms of income that really are bringing us to a perfect storm where it is time for a quantum leap and not for continuous improvement. And that we can't just be in the CSR business. That what we need to do is change the context and the rules in which corporations operate, because they're simply operating by the rules that they've been given. And if we don't change the rules, we don't change the behavior. And I remember this from being an organizational development expert working with companies like Pacific Bell and American Express. Used to say that, well, look, you can go in and change your performance appraisal system, but if you don't attach rewards to that, to the things that you want, you don't change the behavior of your managers. So at the end of it, we concluded that there were really two fundamental themes that need to be addressed. One is the fact that the system is out of balance, that we no longer have the strong countervailing balance to corporate power that we once had. And the second is that we have to change the nature of the market system. And we have to think on that scale for change to really happen. The first is we really need to redefine the corporate purpose to end short-termism and promote social enterprise. In this area, we really need to change executive compensation. Stock options are driving a short-term emphasis that is externalizing costs to community, to government, and to the environment at a huge rate and to future generations. And we really need to be able to begin to quantify externalization and build that into investment practices of pension funds, etc. We also need to determine standards that the moral standards that companies need to meet, and we need to have circuit breakers that said if you don't meet those standards, you can't do business in our communities, you're taxed at a different rate, you're not available for government procurement, you can't receive government subsidies. We need to shift it based on a moral bottom line. The second thing we need to do is redirect capital. Paul Hawken makes a very valid point, and that is that there's no way to really distinguish good companies from bad companies and redirect capital in the direction of those that are good, those that represent the vision that we want for the future. We need to develop rating systems based on normative social and environmental behaviors of corporate behavior. And finally, we need to expand the commons. The commons is an important concept that needs to be developed. These are the resources that are vital for all of us. They are for all of our well-being. They should not be exploited for the benefit of a few. Air, water, forests, rivers, vital resources, not just in resources but also in culture, need to be redefined in terms of the commons, and we need to define no-go zones for-profit corporations, and they need to continually expand. These are areas where for-profit corporations that exist to create benefit for the few cannot go, because fundamentally it contradicts the essence of what those resources are about. Those are for the many, for the vital and future benefit of the many. And they must be managed by entities that are cognizant of that and who are driven by that very principle.
I think the reason for this event is the sort of sense that corporations as wealth-generating institutions are in fact pushing us in the direction of societies both at a national and a global level that we may not want to live in. And so therefore we want to do something different. So let me move from there to the question of corporate governance. Now you all understand that it's not a substitute for the role of government. Debates about corporate governance, and I think you have some papers for this event today, tend to sort of polarize around the question of whether the solution to all our problems, whatever those problems are, is giving more power to shareholders, or whether it's taking power away from shareholders and giving it either directly or indirectly to, quote, stakeholders, to employees, communities, customers, bondholders. The world of stakeholders is very broad, in fact. I'm increasingly convinced that this is sort of a stupid discussion. frankly, that neither formulation is correct, and that what's really important here is thinking back to the sort of real purposes of companies in generating wealth over the long term, and what balance is in corporate governance is the right one in relation to those issues. And I'm increasingly convinced that we need to be looking for a common ground between corporate managers, the reviled CEOs, whom we all love to trash in various contexts, between managers, employees, and long-term investors. That balance, seems to me, is where we might have the chance to move corporations, particularly public corporations, in a more systematic way towards socially positive outcomes, and at the same time meet the very, very real needs and purposes of the people involved in running corporations of making money and having a return, a sustainable long-term return. The labor movement, in case anyone hasn't noticed, is a lot weaker than it was, say, 40 years ago. Our membership, while in constant numbers, is roughly the same. The economy is 3 times as big. The population is 50% larger. The labor movement is slowly shrinking. But nonetheless, the labor movement represents the most powerful force in this society and globally. People talk about counterbalancing forces. We are it. You're talking about real sort of hard power that is not in the corporate dynamic. We are it. If you talk about money to counterbalance corporate money in the political process, we are it. And we are it in places that sort of the quote progressive movement never ever touches in workers' communities around this country. We are the notion of people guard you while you sleep. If you want to know why we still have a constitutional democracy, in large part you owe it to the labor movement that has held some political power during the dark night of the last 8 years.